Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. So we get together every week. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 of us. Sometimes there's 4 or 5. However, our goal, sometimes there's one. There was one last week. That was just yours truly, speaking a little bit about some experiences that I had with critical thinking and people being empowered to make their own decisions and build their own pathways in manufacturing. So the whole idea of what we're doing is to build a conversation that does 2 things. Number one is that it allows you to take a moment and to be nurtured and fed in areas where you may be a little bit stuck. And then number 2 is to empower you to not only get unstuck, but now start asking what's next and what needs to happen in order for your world to be all that you say you want it to be. So with that in mind, we'll get kicked off this morning. I have 2 of my very, very good friends here, Lisa Sheehan, and she'll tell you a little bit more about herself, and then also my good friend Ken Caputo. And as usual, he's met some very exciting people who are up to some great things in the world. And so we'll probably share a little bit about either that or the subjects or whatever people are talking about. So I thought if it works for both of you, since I did a monologue last week, and I'm not quite sure exactly, how well I did it, but I'm very interested in having a conversation and a dialogue with both of you today on a similar subject. And it comes down to, I think the 3 of us have a lot of training and muscle in this area, the whole idea that the world turns on a question. The world has everything to do with you asking the question, not from the standpoint of what, being right or wrong, but what's next? What is made possible, by if we were to get to a point right now where we completely understand what's going on, or understand that we don't understand what's going on. And that's a place to start from in terms of asking really good questions. So would you guys want to talk about critical thinking today and whatever that may or may not mean to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Lisa, would you like to kick off and just tell everybody briefly who you are? And then maybe you could say a few words about, the whole art of questions and critical thinking and whatever comes to your mind.
Lisa Sheehan, been in media my whole life, and currently I co-publish a conscious living magazine called EPIC, which is an acronym for Empowering People in the Inspired Community. It's bi-monthly that we distribute throughout Connecticut. But as far as questions, always question. I just did an interesting practice with a Zoom class the other night, and that was it was just ask yourself a personal question, and it could have been anything silly, and then ask it again, and then ask it again. It could be something as simple as, what am I going to have for dinner? And then, what does my body really want for dinner? What will be the healthiest choice for my body, kind of thing. So you get down to, you just keep asking. And then there's the other form of questions where I was watching a video about elderhood and how they asked, how do we create elders now? And the gentleman's name is Stephen Jenkinson, and he basically said it's kind of hard to do when we have no source, no place to look for examples. So if you start something, so you have to, it was just an interesting question. Like, if you think elders exist, they don't just exist because they're old. There's and they can't just call themselves an elder, because he found this group of 3 claiming to be older people calling themselves elders because they just decided to do that. So he questioned them, as like, why are you calling yourselves elders? So I just find it interesting that there's never an end point, I don't think, to questions, which is kind of cool in many ways. But to leave yourself open for all the different answers that are out there, and to just keep asking.
Excellent. Ken?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things that was shared with me with one of my dear mentors, was keep asking bigger and better questions until the question disappears and an answer reveals itself. And my corollary to that is then get right back to asking questions, you know, because answers are impermanent things, you know. So so yeah, I mean that's and I think that it's a discipline, because it's interesting when you start observing the quality of questions people ask. You know, our tendency is to ask surface questions and with a desire to have an answer, something definitive. You know, we want to know, or we're asking questions because we actually have an answer in our mind and we're trying to lead people to voicing that answer, you know, so that we get a match. So, you know, like leading questions and rhetorical questions, that kind of thing. So, you know, so that's why it was like the bigger and better, because it denoted quality and depth. And that felt like a way to kind of maintain a level of self-awareness and vigilance as to who you are when you are asking the questions, and noticing who someone else is when they're asking questions. You know, who are they being in that at that place and time?
Sure. Kind of a critical element of critical thinking is we have generation upon generation that's taught how to memorize factoids and truths and historical dates and times and all those sorts of things. And once they have the answer to the question of what happened in 1066, all thinking about what it meant, who was involved, you know, the answer to that question stops all thinking about what else is possible. So the whole idea of critical thinking, it has a quality to it, in my opinion, that basically whatever answer you come up with, it's not that. And then the next answer you come up with, well, it's not quite that either, okay? So you're constantly looking into fleshing out, and I've used the analogy of you know, the hidden beast that Arnold Schwarzenegger fights, that he can see nothing except for the footprints, you know, in the ground where it breaks trees and stuff as it's walking, or, you know, has a general idea how tall this thing is because of where limbs are being chopped off of trees when they miss hitting him, and that sort of a thing. So that while life is an extraordinary opportunity to learn, in most cases, people are mostly satisfied to stop where they've already learned the answer to a question early in their life. So for an example to that, we were told that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 or whatever that was. We were not asked, you know, who paid for it, what nationality was he, what was the point, and who was really interested in what he would return, you know, to the mother country with. And when he got where he was going, what adventures occurred then? I don't know about you, but I had to wait until I was in college to read stories about what really happened, and you know, the trials and tribulations of sailing across the sea with no idea where the end point was. But the term critical means something in and of itself. And then thinking is an action word, it's a verb, as opposed to having thoughts. Now, everyone has thoughts. You know, I understand we have like 80,000 of them a day. Even when we're not doing anything, we have thoughts. So distinguishing having thoughts from thinking, and thinking is pondering with an energy and an effort to grapple with something that's worth grappling with. And so, Lisa, you're on day number 3 of a liquid fast. And the reason I bring that up is I'm on day 50 of a deal called Noom that has to do with nutrition. It has to do with mindfulness. It has to do with psych tricks. It has very little to do with telling me what I can and can't eat, okay? So every single day is, what a question that I'm continuously asking, what can I do today that's better, different, bigger, whatever, as Ken was saying earlier, to yesterday, so that I can accomplish not only being healthy and creating a healthy future for myself, but now I've got family here from Colorado that I haven't seen for 2 years. And if you're comfortable talking about, what the situation is when you're in the unknown, and for me, intermittent fasting and fasting in general is always an unknown. I don't always react to it the same way. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I think this time, because I shouldn't say that this is actually my 7th day, but day 5, 6, and 7 are all liquid.
Wow.
So I'm on the 3rd day, final day, which I'm very happy and proud of. But when I started it, because it starts with clean eating, and and no dairy, no alcohol, no sugar, no caffeine. And my 2nd day was a family gathering with a pizza truck and all sorts of sweets, which I had to do the mental change my mindset to the reason I was there was to see all these people and celebrate with my niece and nephew, and not the food. And it really helped me get through that day. So I think it's like another psychological thing, like you talk about with Noom doing. But outside of that, accomplishing anything, I think is a big win. So, and I feel really good today.
I bet.
I don't know.
Have you noticed any difference in your sleeping?
Most nights I slept better. Oddly, there was 1 or 2, but that could be stress related and everything else related. But most nights I have slept better. I must, because I'm keeping like a little diary too of how I feel. But outside of that, that was another plus for it too.
So I'll back up for a second, back on critical thinking. Is it a good thing? Is it the right thing? Is it the best thing?
Well, it's interesting because fasting is a good example. Whoops. Oh, I'm sorry. Lisa, you're breaking up. Oh.
Okay.
No, I was just thinking, fasting's really kind of an interesting example, and it's learn, test, track, recalibrate, because you don't know how you're going to respond. I do a lot of, I basically live on a TRF, time restricted fasting. So usually my fasting is 16, 18 hours, somewhere in there. And then my feed window is 6 to 8 hours a day. So, and it is interesting, Lisa, there's been times where I was doing something, like a breakfast type thing. And, and I usually eat between noon and 6 or noon and 8. So I'm sipping black coffee or green tea while everybody else, the smell of pancakes and eggs and bacon is all around you. It can be kind of brutal sometimes. But, and I always give myself permission to say, I do this regularly. I've created a benefits bank account. So if it's good to enjoy breakfast with my friends, a breakfast, or have a beer with dinner, or whatever, So instead of becoming a slave to it, I think that's part of critical thinking, is what is the optimal outcome based on this situation in this moment, and not to personalize it where you're beating yourself up over it or justifying or defending all of the noise that gets in the way, but fasting is a fascinating thing because everybody's different. And I've had a couple of fasts that the plan was 72 hours, liquid only. And after 36, I was done. Didn't like the way I was feeling. That's the end of it, So, and then other times I started planning on doing a normal one, and then it was just I don't feel like I need to eat today. I'm feeling pretty good. And all of a sudden 3 days has gone by, and then I slowly reintroduced food. So, it's that paying attention and not getting caught up in what you think it's going to be or what other people's experience is, because we are unique. We all respond differently to different things, including nutrition and sleep, exercise, all of that. So.
Yeah, the really key thing that I keep hearing, not only in what you just said, Ken, but people in general, while they are in the process of having these 80,000 thoughts today, um, it's not really easy to tell which of the thoughts are distorted. You know, not all things that you think are true. Not all of them are verifiable. Not even, you know, they may not even adequately reflect how you feel. You know. And essentially a distortion, you know, which would be if you stopped your fast in the middle. Well, okay, I do this a lot in my life, and you know, I always make a decision not to finish what I start, or all those other things that you would say that would be self-sabotaging or defeatist or what have you. And the really interesting part of living a positive life and living a life that's based on your own decisions to make things happen. Um, it has a lot more to do with hearing the noise and the nonsense and discounting and dispelling it, as opposed to empowering it and saying, okay, the reason that I ate was this, and that reason now justifies that you can do exactly the same thing next time. Life doesn't get any different that way. It doesn't get bigger. You know, maybe it does get bitter, but you know, when people take on something that's challenging and difficult. I walked 1.6 miles today around Ashford Lake, where there's an elevation of about 120 feet on the far side of the lake, and about 3/4 of the mile is going uphill. Very challenging. Lots of opportunities to say this is a bad idea. Maybe I should try going back to the flat spot. Had all those thoughts. So, Lisa, are you on a phone by any chance?
No, but my internet's acting wonky.
Yeah, something's going on here. Well, that's what life is.
I'm
right?
back.
Yeah, life can be very wonky when you want it to be a different way. So we'll just kind of ride the horse the way that it's going. I had a big challenge here too, just getting things to connect to the internet today. Maybe there's something going on with all this heat. How's that sound for a made up answer?
Could be.
So, you know, we always have this opportunity to speak personally about all the training that we've had. And I'm always interested in the listeners and what they see going on with regard to how people are trained today, you know, trained in the workforce, trained in the military, trained in schools, all that sort of thing. I hear conversations that the art of critical thinking is one that's not concentrated on in any of those areas all that much anymore. I don't know what you're hearing, Ken and Lisa.
In which areas?
Well, most organizations,
Like,
yeah, typically. Well, let's just take a look at a company, you know, like Amazon, for instance, and how at what levels of the company they have, how many 100,000 employees worldwide. At what levels of the company are they empowered or actually trained to be critical thinkers, and in what percentage of the company are they actually trained to just follow the policies and procedures that are given to them?
well, I guess my question would be, relative to the work that they do, how necessary is critical thinking? You know, like if it's repetitive work, you know, like for example, so teaching, you know, once I taught pretty much the same class for 15 years, you know, a beginner martial arts class, let's say, of course, there would be things that would come up that had to be kind of fluid and adaptable. But for the most part, very rarely did I need to engage critical thinking. I was just getting reps in on something that I'd become very skilled at. So, you know, and then the critical thinking would be something that would then kick in if something unknown or unexpected happened that I hadn't dealt with before, you know. So now I have to engage it. So, you know, so a lot of times work kind of becomes repetitive, and maybe that's part of the challenge is, you know, shifting gears and recognizing this is I need to step out of my rote answers or my rote my trained response or skill set and apply a different way of dealing with this, but I mean, I worked in a warehouse and I was lifting boxes 8 or 10 hours a day, and it was very repetitive and it was almost it was just physical labor. Just put the boxes on the pallets, wrap the pallets, trucks got loaded. That was the job. So where there wasn't much need for critical thinking in that work environment, so so I don't know, I guess that's part of the question.
What you just said is very powerful, Ken. There's no need for critical thinking. There isn't a demand for it. There's no one out there who's saying that your job when you get out of bed every day is to make this a better world. There's no one who's saying that. And the people that work in an environment culture where they are saying that, they have an extraordinary opportunity to get their life out of handling boxes, because they're also told in those environments, however you do things today, I want you to think about a better way to do it. Give me one suggestion per day. And I don't care if out of, a 220 suggestions you give me this year that we don't implement. Welcome back, Lisa. So we're talking about, critical thinking and whether or not it's being taught as a discipline, where in several organizations, including in my school system, critical thinking was a key component. They really wanted us to ask 5 questions, who, what, when, where, and how. Okay. And the reason for that was not, go ahead, Ken.
Oh, I was just thinking, I think just to clarify, it can be situational. Like, for example, we work with a lot of homeschool families.
Sure.
And their work may have been repetitive and require less of a critical thinking investment, but they engaged in constant critical thinking when it came to how best to provide learning experiences for their children. And they're researching and they're working with people and they're testing and they're tracking and they're questioning. And so they're highly engaged in critical thinking, much more than parents whose children were in a public or private school. So those parents would, most of them were responsive to educational challenges when they became aware of them, but they certainly didn't engage in high levels of critical thinking about what their kids were learning. They trusted that the school was doing it, So is one right or wrong? I mean, it's, and so I guess the other thing is, I remember there's this book, Willpower. I think the guy was Bill Lair, might have been his name. Yep. He was talking about when we travel, how exhausting it is. And one of the reasons is because we have to engage a lot more brain power for everything, even how the faucets work in the shower, how to, all of the habits that you have in your home that allow your brain to exert less energy, right? And conserve, you lose that. So you're more tired when you travel because you have to do this. We're designed, I guess the point, critical thinking, the more you engage your brain, the more energy you burn, the more tired you're going to be. So that's why we set up systems and habits of, through repetition that allow us to conserve. So, so that's why I'm questioning. I agree. It needs to be introduced, taught, and trained as a skill. And I think like anything else, it needs to be used appropriately. And it's not just something that belongs everywhere where you need more critical thinking. No, you need critical thinking in a skillful way when appropriate based on the situation. It's a tool you should be capable of accessing.
Well, I'm really glad you're saying things just this way. I am devil's advocate in this conversation right now. It's not personal to what you said about working in a warehouse and not thinking about it. Mm-hmm. I'm saying to you that there is no demand for, like a possibility, there is no demand for critical thinking, or it's a tool you pull off the shelf if things are broke, okay? We use critical thinking to solve problems, and that's actually not true. Problem solving is not critical thinking. Problem solving has to do with minimizing the loss from an unexpected situation or a breakdown. critical thinking, and I'm going to use, a man named Werner Erhard. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. Everyone that ever worked with him was trained in a particular way. No matter what they did, if they were cleaning the bathroom, or if they were, driving his car, or they were producing, the event that he was going to speak at, he would ask them all the first question. The mother of all questions is, what are you building? This is a guy scrubbing a toilet. What are you building? And then the person scrubbing the toilet, because everybody got an opportunity to scrub the toilet. And they all got to scrub the toilet so that they would understand that there is no such thing as a quality of job that makes you a better person or less of a person. Everyone can bring everything they possibly can bring to every single job and make it a work of art. So the whole idea was that he would engage a person, and then he'd just keep asking questions. The first question is, what are you building? And then the answer to it might be, well, I'm building a better life for myself. And then his next question as he stood there would be, and what will that make possible? And the answer to that question might be that one of these days that I can have a family. And what will that make possible? One of these days that I can have children and I can raise them, and I can, admire, how they process the world and the things that they do. And this would go on for a time. And I actually watched this type of an engagement, not with Werner, but with his brother and another person, that went on for 45 minutes. At the end of that, everybody in the audience stood and gave about 5 minutes of continuous applause. Not because there was anything that was so great, it was the work that went into the questions and the answers, and they weren't like a pat set of questions. They were completely appropriate to what the conversation was doing. So if you take this and you contextualize it to, what if everyone got out of bed every single morning, and instead of downing some painkillers, before heading off to catch the bus, they spent 5 minutes of yoga, or they spent 5 minutes of being mindful and thankful for their surroundings, and they, breathed, and they could feel themselves and start to understand their body and those sensations. So the critical thinking element is either, I want to say, it's like being pregnant, okay? You either is or you isn't, as opposed to it being a tool. And I think most people who have rigorously been trained in a critical thinking environment, which our school system was, by the way. I mean, most of the folks that taught us were way overqualified to be teaching in public school. We had people who had previously taught in private schools, and this was going to be kind of an experiment, in 1963, when they built this brand new school and they hired all these brand new teachers, for high school, 7th through 12th. So they didn't tell us they were teaching us critical thinking, by the way. They didn't tell us that at all. We wouldn't have been interested in learning critical thinking. We were an experiment to try to find out what happens if people are continuously challenged in a positive way that makes them recognize their role and their possible, contribution to whatever else is going on. How successful was it? I don't know, but it stayed with me. And I've probably gravitated to different types of organizations that seem to have that present. So Lisa, in terms of the questions and questioning everything, since you haven't had a chance to talk for very much in this segment, I'd like to just give you the floor and hear anything that you have to say that you think would be mindful, or maybe not mindful, maybe whatever it is Lisa has on your mind at the moment.
Well, I watched a similar thing where, and the question was simply why, and then you repeat back what the person answered.
Yeah.
And you do it 7 times, basically, is what they came down to. So just keep getting a deeper and deeper why. And people don't go that far even within themselves. So I think, even if you're waking up in the morning and you want to take a pill and you ask yourself why, and then maybe you'll get a better answer. And just like why times 7 is like one of those things, because it's hard to do too. You really need to bounce off of somebody else to ask you the question back again. But it's a good exercise, and I think it's as simple as that. Just why times 7.
Yep. What else, Lisa?
Well, the only other strange thing I was thinking about was like when they were I never learned it, but the new math that they were teaching, and the kids couldn't do a regular problem like we all learned how to do mathematics. They had to figure out why and how they got there. And after a while, I kind of thought, well, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it because that involved critical thinking, and but most, of course, adults were poo-pooing the whole thing because they never did it themselves. So, but I thought that was an interesting approach. I know it was a long time ago now, even that, but to have a little bit of critical thinking in schools from that long ago too. I mean, obviously you were a success from your schooling because of your intense critical thinking to the day, and I'm sure it's been with you the whole time.
Well, some people would describe it as a pain in their backside. And it comes from engaging human beings as having a contribution, and an intense desire to discover what that contribution is. The world gives you something if you just walk by 15 or 20 people a day and you say, hi, how you doing? They say, oh, I'm good, have a nice day, and that's it. That's the whole conversation. Or if every once in a while you just stop and say, hey, look, I really admire, that shirt that you have on. I'm a Led Zeppelin fan too. Where did you get that? And then they say, well, it was an Old Navy, or some kind of a, really non-deep answer like that. But the full measure of it is to recognize feelings and emotion in other people. I've been playing a game recently of going to different places for breakfast and ordering the exact same menu items in all of these different places. So that when I go in, exactly, Lisa. So when I go in now, everyone in the place who's waited on me, they'll suggest to me what I'm going to have. And I, being a consistent human being and wanting to reward them, the payoff isn't that they got it right. The payoff is that we get to share a moment and a really deep felt smile. We've created language together, and there's the mind meld that goes back and forth. Yes, I'll have 2 eggs over hard, and then I'll have a side of bacon, and I'll have whatever vegetables that you would put into a vegetable omelet. I will have a big cup of that, et cetera, et cetera. So then we get to the point where we both get to compliment each other on what great smiles that we have, or whatever else seems to show up in the moment. But I don't ever think of critical thinking. Do you know what I mean? As a subject or a topic, it doesn't come up. And Ken, I know you well enough that you've always had mentors that they would always ask you the questions that would set your day up for you, that you could spring off of and then go forth and do amazing things, and then kind of generate that in all the people around you.
Yeah. Yeah. And really just also, I don't know, I think the doorway was always curiosity. And because I would say a lot of my mentors are just authors who I've never met, and
Right.
just being curious about something to go about it. And actually, as we've been talking, I have a suggestion for the next half of our episode,
Yes.
and it would be the impact of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And what that does, it's be an interesting lens, because when you start to learn something, there's that whole scale of your confidence in what you now know in the short term
Sure.
basis your experience with it. So, and how disproportionate that is. I think actually that's created a lot of tension over the last year and a half. Is, you learn something, you hear something, you think you understand it, your confidence in your understanding of it goes through the roof, but it's not an earned, there's not the earned experience hasn't happened yet. That takes a year plus. Adam Grant talks about it in a book called Think Again, that he published in direct response to, the pandemic, people's response to the pandemic. And, he was documenting that. So it's an interesting thing that I think correlates with this whole conversation.
Well, let me say this. I am so excited that you brought that up. And I really think this is an awesome place for us to punctuate the end of the beginning and start the beginning of the next cycle. Does that work for you, Lisa?
Works for me.
All right. So Ken, you will play kickoff, okay, in the next upcoming episode. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the flip side. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.